Most people think of their health savings account as nothing more than a medical expense slush fund. You put money in, swipe the card at the doctor's office, and that's the end of it. But the reality is an HSA can either be one of the most wasted accounts in America or a seriously underused retirement tool. And the difference isn't just a few $100. We're talking tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. A new study found that only about 9% of account holders are using the Supercharged HSA strategy I'm about to show you. That means 91% are leaving life-changing money on the table. So in this video, I'll walk you through the mistakes that destroy an HSA's potential and the strategies that turn it from a glorified checking account into one of the most valuable accounts that you'll ever own. Okay, I'm going to assume that you already understand the bare bones of what an HSA is. If you don't, I'll have a video down in the description that breaks down the basics like contribution limits, eligibility rules, and all of that good stuff. Some of you might be new to my method of supercharging an HSA, so let me catch you up on what it means so you're not confused when I refer to it all throughout this video. It's basically where you contribute to an HSA, and as medical expenses come up, you pay for them out of pocket instead of using the money sitting in your health savings account. You'll eventually reimburse yourself from the HSA for these out-of-pocket expenses at some point in the future, which I'll show you how to do, but the main goal is to keep as much money as possible in the account for as long as possible. This gives your money the ability to stay invested and grow for the long term. Here's how it works. Let's say it's 2026 and you either have self-only coverage or family coverage, and you contribute the maximum of $4,400 or $8,750 to your HSA for the year. Now, for simplicity's sake, let's also say that you have $4,400 or $8,750 worth of medical expenses that same year. Most people would just swipe their HSA debit card and call it good. But instead, you pay those expenses out of pocket, which means the full $4,400 or $8,750 contribution stays inside your HSA. If that money is invested and left alone for 25 years at a 7% average annual return, it grows to almost $24,000 for the self-only individual and $47,500 for the family. And here's the best part. At any point in the future, you can still reimburse yourself for the original $4,400 or $8,750 you paid out of pocket in 2026. So really, by choosing not to spend from your HSA today, you gave your future self an extra $19,500 or almost $39,000 of tax-free growth. Or another way to look at it, you just gave yourself the ability to cover nearly $20,000 or $40,000 worth of future medical expenses with money you never would have had otherwise. Now keep in mind that all of these numbers are only based on contributing to an HSA for 1 year. If you do it for multiple years, then in some cases, you can easily 5 or 10x those numbers. That's why I don't think of it as a health savings account at all. When you use my supercharged method, it becomes a health retirement account, or better yet, a health investment account. Now, knowing what a supercharged HSA is and how it works is a huge first step. But here's the thing, just understanding the concept is not enough. For this strategy to actually work, you've got to avoid a handful of really common mistakes that can completely wipe out the benefit. I see these all the time, and the frustrating part is they're totally preventable. In fact, just the other day, my sister called me up with a few personal finance questions, and it turns out that she was making one of these exact mistakes with her HSA. Now, when we get to that point, I will show you what that was and how we fixed it. The biggest mistake I see with HSAs is that people never actually invest the money. By default, most providers leave your contributions sitting in cash, and as we all know, cash does not grow. The data backs this up. According to the most recent Devenir report, only about 9% of all HSA accounts have any money invested. That means some of those 91% of people are completely missing out on the real benefit of this account. But here's the wild part. Even though a small group invests, they account for 44% of all HSA assets. In other words, a disciplined minority is building serious wealth while everyone else is letting their money rot in cash. The difference shows up in the balances. The average HSA with investments has about $22,000 in it, almost 9 times larger than the average funded non-investment account. Now, clearly, not everyone with an HSA can afford to invest the money, especially if they're covering big medical bills every single year. But a portion of that 91% are simply too cautious, or they just haven't been educated about investing the money, and it leaves their money sitting in cash where it's not working for them. To put numbers to it, if a self-coverage person invested just half their contributions every year, which is about $2,200, over 25 years at a 7% average annual return, he'd end up with about $139,000. Of that, only $55,000 is contributions. The rest, more than $84,000, is tax-free growth. And if you invested the full contribution every year instead of half, you'd be looking at close to $280,000. Remember that you don't have to be a weirdo like me who invests every single dollar, but investing at least some of your HSA money is what unlocks the real wealth building power of this account. My sister called me up the other day and we were going through what she's doing with her HSA. When she has medical expenses, she pays for it out of pocket, allowing the money to stay invested, which is the right move if you were doing the supercharged method. But here's the problem. She wasn't doing the next step, which is keeping a record of those expenses that she was paying out of pocket for future reimbursement. Without proof, she won't be able to reimburse herself later. The IRS requires documentation that your expenses were legitimate, qualified, and occurred after your HSA was opened. No receipt means no tax-free reimbursement. This is especially important for those of us who don't plan on cashing in on our current medical expenses for another 20 plus years. I don't know about you, but in 2046, I'm not going to remember the expenses that I had back in 2026, let alone keep copies of the receipts either. That's why I always tell people to think of these receipts like $100 bills. If you lose them, you are literally throwing away free money. Here's my receipt tracking process to make things easier that you can use if you want. First, use some sort of cloud storage to create two folders titled To Be Reimbursed and Reimbursed. When you pay for medical expenses out of pocket, scan it or snap a picture, then save a copy in the To Be Reimbursed folder. Rename the file with the dollar amount first, then the date. That way, if you want to withdraw, say, $5,000 in the future for a vacation, you can quickly sort your receipts by amount and pick the ones that add up to that total. Once you quote-unquote cash in on those receipts, move them to the reimbursed folder so you don't accidentally double dip. I also keep a simple HSA expense tracker spreadsheet with a line item for each receipt, so I always know exactly how much I could reimburse at any point in time. You can either make a spreadsheet like this on your own or get a free copy of mine down in the description of this video. The IRS is going to need documented proof like this if they ever audit you and question the legitimacy of your HSA withdrawals. And before you ask, yes, I confirmed with multiple HSA providers that digital copies count the same as physical receipts. Now, once you've got everything set up, the process honestly only takes maybe 30 seconds per expense, but it gives you the ability to unlock a chunk of money whenever the heck you want. For example, I've personally paid about $8,000 out of pocket on medical expenses since I opened my first HSA. Whenever I want, I can cash in those receipts and pull that money out tax-free. Now, if you're like my sister and haven't been keeping proof of the out-of-pocket medical expenses that you've been paying, I've got some good and some bad news. The bad news is that if you can't get access to copies of those receipts, you cannot reimburse yourself for them from your HSA. So if you bought something like a bottle of Advil at a random gas station on a road trip and the receipt is long gone, you are SOL. Out of luck. But here's the good news. A lot of medical providers such as hospitals, doctors' offices, chiropractors, and places like that usually keep copies of receipts or payment records on file. Reach out to them and ask for proof of payment, and they can usually either email you or mail you a copy. Since my sister has had her HSA for a few years, what I told her to do was go through her past credit card statements or debit card statements to figure out where she spent the money and then call those providers one by one to request copies. And for smaller HSA approved items, you might actually get a little bit lucky too. Retailers like Amazon or Walmart keep a history of past purchases in your account. A few weeks ago, I bought some Advil from Walmart and accidentally threw away the receipt. Of course, the guy who talks about HSAs throws away the freaking receipt. So I logged into their website and easily saved a copy of that purchase. That way, I can reimburse myself. One question I get all the time is whether you can reimburse yourself for medical expenses that happened before your HSA was established. So let's say you open your first HSA in 2026, but you had medical bills in 2025. even if you've got the receipts, those expenses do not qualify. The IRS won't let you go back in time and count them prior to when your first HSA was established. It sounds obvious once you hear it, but I have seen plenty of people making this mistake thinking that they could retroactively claim older expenses. Unfortunately, that is not how it works. The good news is that once your first HSA is established, you don't have to be actively enrolled in an HSA-eligible health plan to take withdrawals from the account. For example, if you enroll in an HSA in 2026, then switch to a non-HSA health plan in 2027 through the rest of your life, by 2030, if that original 2026 HSA has grown to say $10,000, you can still use that money to pay for medical bills in 2030. The easy way to remember it is this: you must be enrolled in an HSA eligible plan to contribute, but you do not have to be enrolled to take withdrawals. Another mistake I see is people trying to pay for medical expenses out of their HSA for someone who does not qualify. If you have family coverage, you can use the money for anyone covered under the plan with no issues. But beyond that, the only way you can use HSA money for someone else is if the IRS considers them a dependent. On screen, I'll show you a high-level overview of what dependent means, but there's a lot more to it. If you want to dig deeper, look up IRS Publication 502 around page 3. They break it all down. I highly recommend reading it so you know exactly who qualifies. Listen, I get the intention. You want to help someone you know, but your HSA cannot be a part of that generosity. The IRS will treat it as an unqualified withdrawal, and you'll get hit with taxes as well as penalties. The Supercharged HSA strategy is powerful, but some people push it way too far. I've seen folks get so focused on maximizing growth that they avoid necessary medical treatment, or worse, skip going to the doctor altogether just so that they don't have to pull money out of their HSA. To be clear, that is not the point of an HSA. Your health always needs to come first. The fact that I have to say this is crazy. The HSA, it's a tool, not a reason for you to neglect your well-being. If you can comfortably cover medical bills out of pocket, then great. Let the HSA money stay invested. But if you can't, or if it means delaying treatment, use the freaking money in the account. That is literally what it is there for. A little pro tip: some people also find it helpful to keep a small cushion of cash inside their HSA, maybe enough to cover their deductible, so they don't feel like they're risking everything by investing 100% of the balance. That way, you've got peace of mind and still let the majority of your HSA dollars compound over the long term. Now, avoiding those mistakes will keep your HSA from backfiring on you. But there's another side of this, a set of lesser known rules that most people never hear about. These aren't mistakes so much as they're opportunities or fine print that can make a big difference in how you use your HSA. And if you understand them, you'll have way more flexibility and way fewer surprises than the average account holder. So let's go through some of the hidden rules most people do not know. One of the most powerful but least known rules is that the receipts you accumulate to cash in on in the future never expire. If you pay for a qualified medical expense out of pocket today and keep track of everything like we talked about earlier, you can reimburse yourself years, even decades later, as long as you keep the proof. There is no time limit. So that $200 bill from an urgent care visit in 2026, you could wait until 2046 to reimburse yourself as long as you still have the receipt. As I said before, I've got about $8,100 worth of receipts for medical expenses I've paid out of pocket over the last few years. If I ever get into a financial bind, I can pull that money out tax-free whenever the heck I want. Or if I let it sit invested for 25 years, it could grow to around $44,000. Think of these receipts like IOUs to your future self. As long as you've got the documentation, you can cash them in whenever you want.
What is this? Where's all the money?
That's as good as money, sir. Those are IOUs. Go ahead and add it up. Every cent's accounted for.
Another thing most people don't realize is that the list of what counts as a qualified medical expense for HSAs isn't set in stone. Every few years, new items are added. A good example was the CARES Act in 2020, which permanently expanded HSA eligibility to include over-the-counter medications like Tylenol, Advil, allergy meds, and even female care products, all without a prescription. Before that, none of those things counted. That means what isn't eligible today could become eligible in the future. So it's worth keeping an eye out for updates every single year, because you might find that everyday items you're already buying can now be paid for or reimbursed tax-free through your HSA. But here's the catch. If something new gets added to the approved list, you cannot go back in time and reimburse yourself for past purchases. These sorts of things are usually not retroactive. For example, when I deal with a soft tissue injury, I buy and inject peptides to speed up the healing process because they have been an absolute miracle for me. Last year, I spent a few $1,000s on them to heal tendinitis in my arm. But since peptides are not an HSA approved expense today, I cannot reimburse myself for that cost. And even if they do become approved down the road, say in 2030, I still wouldn't be able to go back and claim what I spent in 2024. So I know any of you who have had a life-changing experience using peptides like I have, then leave your story in the comments down below because I think a lot more people need to know about these. Another thing most people don't realize is that you can use your HSA for qualified medical expenses outside of the US as long as two conditions are met. First, the expense qualifies under the US tax law, and second, it's considered legal in the country where you receive the care. So if you're traveling abroad and need medical treatment, you can absolutely use your HSA funds or keep a copy of the receipt for future reimbursement. But here's a practical tip. Avoid swiping your HSA debit card internationally since a lot of them hammer you with foreign transaction fees. We've covered rules that give you more flexibility while you're alive. But here's one that most people never think about. What happens to your HSA after you're gone? This is where things get a little confusing because HSAs don't behave the same way as IRAs or 401ks when you pass them down. And if you don't know the difference, your family could get stuck with a surprise tax bill. Since this can get confusing, I'll explain at a high level, then walk through an example so you can see exactly how it works in the real world. When you pass away, what happens to your HSA depends entirely on who inherits it. If your spouse is the beneficiary, they inherit it as their own HSA. It keeps all the tax advantages and just becomes their account. If a non-spouse beneficiary inherits it, like your kids, siblings, or even your estate, it stops being an HSA on the date you die. The entire value becomes ordinary income to that beneficiary in the year of your death. Here's an important nuance. If the original HSA owner used the supercharged method and paid out of pocket for medical expenses without reimbursing themselves, non-spouse beneficiaries cannot cash those in tax-free later. That option dies with the original account owners. There is one small carve-out though. Your beneficiaries can use HSA funds to pay for any of your qualified medical bills that happened before you die, as long as they pay them within 12 months of your death. Whatever they pay for reduces the taxable amount that they have to report. Here's how it looks in the real world. Let's say I'm your dad and I am married to your mother. Yes, you have to call me daddy. I am sorry, I don't make the rules. You have to call me daddy. Period. End of story. Your mom and I have $100,000 in our HSA. Over the years, we've paid $20,000 of medical expenses out of pocket and have all of the receipts saved so we could reimburse ourselves whenever we want. Eventually, I kick the can. I know, you should start crying right about now. If mom is listed as the beneficiary, then there's no problem. The HSA becomes hers with all of the same tax benefits. She can still pull that $20,000 at any time for those expenses that we had in the past. Fast forward a bit and mom gets sick. She's in a skilled nursing facility for 3 months, then passes away with $100,000 in the account and never got a chance to reimburse that $20,000 for their past expenses. Since you're the beneficiary now, here's the tough part. You cannot reimburse yourself for those $20,000 worth of old receipts. That window closed when she passed away. Anytime during those 3 months, you and mom could have withdrawn the money, but with everything going on like stress, medical chaos, not understanding her full financial picture, it wasn't exactly at the top of your guys' mind. Now you inherit the full $100,000 HSA. That $100,000 is added to your taxable income. If you earn, say, $80,000 from your job, the IRS now sees you as having $180,000 of income for the year. But here's where the carve-out helps. Let's say mom had $30,000 in unpaid hospital bills at the time of her death that she accumulated during those last 3 months. You have up to a year to pay those bills out of the HSA. That reduces your taxable income from her HSA from $100,000 down to $70,000. If there are multiple non-spouse beneficiaries, those amounts, of course, get split between all of you. As you can see, there are a lot of moving parts here. This is one of those times where it's worth looping in an accountant so nothing falls through the cracks. One of the biggest complaints I hear about HSAs is this: why would I want to build up a big HSA balance? What if I never need to spend all of the money on medical expenses? People say that like the money is going to be dead or wasted if they don't use it, but that's just not how HSAs work. Once you hit 65, your HSA essentially turns into a pre-tax retirement account like a traditional IRA or traditional 401k. Here's how the rule breaks down. Before age 65, non-medical withdrawals get hit with ordinary income tax plus a 20% penalty, but medical expenses are always tax-free. For example, let's say you take out $100 from your HSA before 65 for something non-medical, and you're in the 22% tax bracket. You'd owe $22 in income tax plus a $20 penalty. That means you'd lose $42 total, and you only pocket $58 from your original $100. I'm surprised I have to say this, but please, for God's sakes, do not do this. At age 65 and beyond, the 20% penalty disappears. You can withdraw money for any reason, non-medical included, and you'll just pay ordinary income tax exactly like a traditional IRA. Except this is kind of better than a pre-tax retirement account, because with those accounts, you'll eventually pay required minimum distributions. There are no RMDs with an HSA. It's kind of like a pre-tax account on steroids. For medical expenses at any age, those withdrawals are always 100% tax-free. That includes things like Medicare premiums, prescriptions, dental, and vision costs in retirement. If I'm sitting in retirement and my HSA is ballooned to, we'll say, $250,000, which is possible, and I don't think that I'm going to spend all of that on medical expenses, then I might withdraw, say, $100,000 for non-medical expenses and leave the other $150,000 there for medical expenses. So the worst case is you have another pre-tax retirement account. Boo-hoo. The best case is that you have a tax-free healthcare fund that saves you from dipping into your other retirement accounts. That's why building up a large HSA balance is not wasted money. It's one of the most flexible accounts that you have for retirement. All right, so now you've got the foundation down. You know how to supercharge your HSA, avoid the common mistakes, and even the hidden rules most people never hear about. But if you really want to take this to the next level, there are a few pro moves that can help you get even more out of your HSA. Now, I'm going to warn you right now that all of these are not for everyone. But if you are serious about maximizing the account, they can make a huge difference. If there's one account where it often makes sense to lean more aggressively with your investments, it's the ones that grow tax-free. Your Roth 401k, Roth IRA, and HSA. Here's why. In a supercharged setup, the goal is to leave the money invested for as long as possible, sometimes decades. That means you're not planning to touch it anytime soon, which gives you the time horizon to ride out market volatility. In practical terms, that often means going 100% equities inside of your HSA. Stocks have historically provided higher long-term returns than bonds or cash. And in an account where every bit of growth can come out tax-free, ideally, you'd want this account to grow as large as possible. Of course, this only works if you're actually comfortable with the ups and downs. If seeing your balance drop 30% in a bad market would make you panic and pull the plug, then a more balanced allocation might make a better fit for you. But for people using the supercharged method, treating their HSA as a long-term investment vehicle, leaning heavily or even entirely into equities is one of the simplest ways to unlock bigger growth. One of the largest frustrations with HSAs is that most employer-linked providers are frankly terrible. They tack on account fees, investment access fees, or force you to keep a minimum cash balance in the account. Here's the fix. Even if your payroll contributions have to flow into your employer's chosen HSA provider, you're not stuck there forever. You can open a second HSA with a low-cost provider like Fidelity and set up partial balance transfers. That means let the contributions land in your employer's HSA for the tax break, then monthly, quarterly, or even once a year, move the balance over to your personal HSA where you can invest every single dollar in whatever you want with no account fees. At one of my previous employers, they used Health Equity as their HSA provider, and they forced us to carry a minimum of $1,000 in cash that could not be invested. This annoyed the crap out of me because I wanted to invest all of my money. So here's what I did. Every single time money hit my Health Equity account, I transferred everything except $1 to a Fidelity HSA. I always left that $1 behind because if I transferred 100%, Health Equity would close the account and my employer wouldn't have anywhere to put my HSA money every single time I got paid. How do I know? Because I tried it and I got a little slap on the wrist. Consider me your guinea pig for what not to do. Yes, the whole process of transferring money is a little bit of extra work, but it could save you a lot in fees and unlock way better investment options. Now, a couple of things that you should know about the whole HSA provider ecosystem in general. First, always use Fidelity whenever possible. If your employer chose a different provider, you are stuck until you leave that job. But as soon as you do, transfer your balance to Fidelity as soon as possible, please. Not only do they let you invest 100% of your balance without fees, but their cash rate is better than most providers if you want to hold some in cash. Second, don't get fooled by the no-fee marketing from anyone other than Fidelity. Take Lively, for example. They used to be free, but then started charging fees, and now they're running promos to waive them again. They flip-flop too much for me to trust them to not change it again in the future. Moral of the story, every HSA provider is complete trash except Fidelity. That's my opinion, of course. Please do not sue me. And when you go to open a Fidelity HSA, you'll see they offer two different options. The Fidelity Go HSA, which they manage for you and charge a fee for, and the regular Fidelity HSA, which has 0 account fees. That's the one you want. If you want to do a partial transfer, you'll actually start the process on the Fidelity side of things. You'll fill in the info about your HSA provider, the account number, the amount, stuff like that, and Fidelity will reach out to them to pull the money over to your Fidelity HSA. For those of you who are creating a supercharged HSA and paying for everything out of pocket, consider using a solid rewards credit card to get an added bonus. I rarely fly since my dog Molly travels with me everywhere since she's my shadow, basically. She's back there snoring away if you can't hear. That's why I personally like the 2% cashback Fidelity card over something like a travel rewards credit card. I not only like this card because of the 2% cash back on everything, but they actually allow me to transfer my cash rewards straight into a brokerage account where I just invest the money instead of spend it. One word of caution, only do this if you are disciplined about paying off the card in full by the end of every month. The last thing you want is to turn a tax advantage strategy into credit card debt at 20% interest. In case you were wondering, Fidelity is not sponsoring this video and they didn't pay me to say anything in this video. I'm just gassing them up because they are the best when it comes to HSAs and credit cards. At this point, I think it's pretty clear why a health savings account is so powerful. But there's another powerful investment account a lot of people are ignoring as well, which you can learn about in this video to your left next. If you've got some value from this video, then please hit that like button and share it with someone you think needs to see it. I'll see you in the next one, friends. Done.